Duke Roland declared that no woman would command his coastline again. Before the Royal Regatta Committee, he accused Duchess Beatrice of falsifying flood estimates, dismissed every engineer loyal to her, and signed the destruction of the Seawall so his patron's racing ships could enter Blackhaven. Beatrice rose without tears. She informed the committee that the wall, pumps, surveying equipment, and rescue boats belonged to her marriage settlement, not Roland's estate. By dawn, her family had removed every machine. Her merchant cousins diverted their cargo to a rival port, the fishermen hauled their boats ashore, and London insurers refused to cover a single guest entering Blackhaven. Roland's celebration began collapsing before the first stone fell. But Beatrice's counterattack uncovered something worse. Tide measurements recorded by Roland's new surveyor differed from hers by precisely 6 feet, always in the same direction. When she opened the abandoned signal tower, she found the original gauges hidden beneath the floor, and a list of villages marked for purchase after the expected flood. 6 hours earlier, Roland's signature had looked almost black against the demolition order. He sat at the head of the long committee table inside Blackhaven's harbor house, dressed in a dark blue coat with silver embroidery chosen for the occasion. Beyond the windows, pennants bearing the royal colors snapped above the unfinished viewing stands. Workmen waited beside the seawall with iron hammers, while Lord Mercer's 2 racing cutters rested in the channel like polished knives. Beatrice stood opposite her husband with her leather survey case beneath one hand. "The eastern channel cannot be widened safely," she said. "The spring tide will arrive in 9 days. If the central barrier is removed before then, Saltmere, Lower Haven, and St. Anne's Reach will take the full force of it." Lord Mercer leaned back in his chair. His jeweled fingers rested upon the gold head of his cane. "Your Grace," he said to Roland, "must every celebration in Blackhaven be governed by your wife's anxieties?" Several committee members smiled. Roland did not. For 13 years, Beatrice had watched that expression harden whenever another man suggested she possessed authority he did not. At first, he had taken pride in her knowledge. During their first winter as husband and wife, he had ridden beside her through waist-high floodwater and held the lantern while she measured the breach that nearly destroyed Saltmere. He had called the completed wall their greatest achievement. Then the harbor grew profitable. Merchants began writing to Beatrice instead of Roland. Fishermen brought their disputes to her office. Admiralty inspectors requested her calculations. Each success placed another invisible stone between husband and wife. Lord Mercer had merely taught Roland to resent the wall aloud. Roland pushed a ledger across the table. "My new surveyor has examined your figures," he said. "The danger was exaggerated. You demanded funds for repairs that were never necessary." Beatrice did not touch the ledger. "Mr. Pike has worked on this coast for 11 weeks. I have measured it for 12 years and charged my estate handsomely for the privilege." The insult silenced the room. Beatrice's fingers tightened once around the brass handle of her survey case. The pumps protecting the lower harbor had been purchased with her dowry. The rescue boats belonged to the charitable trust founded by her mother. Even the stone wall stood upon land secured to Beatrice under the marriage settlement Roland had signed without reading. He knew all of that. His accusation was not ignorance. It was a choice. "You have the accounts," she said. "If you believe I stole from you, name the sum." A pulse moved in Roland's jaw. "This is not a trial. No. In a trial, you would require evidence." Lord Mercer's cane struck the floor. Roland rose. "You forget whom you are addressing." Beatrice met his eyes. I remember precisely. For one suspended moment, the man she had once loved seemed close enough to reach. Roland glanced toward the windows, where tenants, fishermen, and reporters had gathered to witness the committee's decision. He could have delayed the demolition. He could have ordered an independent survey. He could have spoken to Beatrice privately and preserved the dignity of them both. Instead, he lifted the silver seal. Duchess Beatrice is relieved of all authority over Blackhaven Harbor, he announced. The Seawall will be opened before the Royal Regatta. He pressed the seal into the wax. Applause came first from Lord Mercer. Beatrice looked down at the fresh impression, then opened her survey case. She removed neither calculations nor maps. She took out 4 folded documents and placed them beside Roland's order. The first established her ownership of the drainage pumps. The second covered the surveying instruments. The third transferred the rescue fleet to a trust beyond Roland's control. The fourth authorized her family's bank to withdraw the credit maintaining the harbor works. Roland's face changed as he read the first page. You would cripple my port over a disagreement? You have dismissed the woman responsible for keeping it alive, Beatrice replied. I am merely respecting your decision. She closed the empty case and walked out. No one stopped her. By midday, her engineers had packed their instruments. By 2 o'clock, the steam pumps fell silent. At 3, the merchant vessel Providence changed course toward Fairhaven, followed by 9 grain barges and 2 ships carrying French wine. Before sunset, red cancellation notices appeared upon the doors of every warehouse insured through Beatrice's family. Roland sent 6 messages demanding that she return. She opened none of them. Instead, Beatrice rode to the abandoned eastern signal tower with Thomas Vale, the gray-haired harbor master who had served her father before her marriage. The tower had supposedly been closed because its foundation was unsafe, yet the new brass lock showed no trace of salt corrosion. Someone was still using it. Inside, dust covered the stairs but not their center. Fresh boot marks climbed toward the lantern room. Beatrice followed them, holding her lamp low until Thomas discovered shallow scratches around one of the floorboards. They lifted it together. Beneath lay 3 original tide gauges wrapped in sailcloth, each bearing Beatrice's engraved identification mark. The figures matched her calculations exactly. Mr. Pike's official records had reduced every dangerous tide by 6 feet. Thomas crossed himself. Beatrice found a second packet beneath the gauges. It contained 12 purchase agreements prepared in Lord Mercer's name. Each offered a fraction of the land's true value. Each concerned property in one of the 3 villages that would be destroyed if the seawall failed. None had yet been signed. They mean to frighten the villagers into selling, Thomas whispered. No, Beatrice said, studying the dates. These agreements become valid only after the properties are declared uninhabitable. A sound came from the stairs below. Thomas extinguished their lamp. Beatrice gathered the papers against her chest as footsteps entered the tower, slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to Roland's surveyor. Then a man's voice rose through the darkness. Find the Duchess, Lord Mercer ordered. She must not leave this tower with those gauges. Beatrice pressed the purchase agreements into Thomas's hands and pointed toward the narrow ladder leading to the lantern platform. Take the papers to the roof. If they capture me, cross to the keeper's cottage and ride directly to Fairhaven. I will not leave you. You will if you want those villages to survive. The footsteps reached the final turn of the staircase. Beatrice slipped one original tide gauge beneath her coat and left the other 2 under the loose floorboard. Then she stepped into the open with an empty packet in her hand. Lord Mercer emerged first, followed by Mr. Pike and 2 harbor guards wearing Roland's colors. Mercer smiled. "You have developed a regrettable habit of trespassing, Your Grace. This tower belongs to the Coastal Trust." "It belonged to the Trust. Your husband transferred its management to me this morning." Beatrice glanced at the guards. Both had served at Blackhaven for years. Neither could meet her eyes. "Did the Duke also authorize you to conceal official tide gauges?" Pike's face tightened. Mercer extended one gloved hand. "Give me whatever you found." Beatrice held up the empty packet. "Come and take it." When Mercer stepped forward, she threw it through the broken window. All 4 men turned instinctively toward the fluttering paper. Beatrice seized the iron lever controlling the lantern screen and pulled it down. The heavy brass panel swung across the room, striking Pike in the shoulder and blocking the staircase. "Now, Thomas!" Above them, a hatch slammed open. Mercer understood at once. The harbor master has the documents. The guards struggled against the screen, while Beatrice forced its locking pin into place. It would not hold them long. She climbed through the maintenance window and descended the tower's outer ladder as Thomas crossed the roof toward the keeper's cottage. Pike broke through first. He caught the hem of Beatrice's coat as she reached the lowest rung. The fabric tore, but the hidden gauge remained pressed against her ribs. She dropped into the wet grass and ran toward the cliff path. A pistol fired behind her. The ball struck stone near her shoulder. Beatrice did not look back. Thomas had already reached the cottage, where 2 saddled horses waited beneath the lean-to. He threw the packet into a leather dispatch bag and mounted. Beatrice climbed onto the second horse, moments before Mercer's guards emerged from the tower. They rode north along the cliff road. At the fork, Beatrice pulled Thomas to a halt. "You must go to my brother," she said. "Place the agreements in Sir Matthew's hands, and no one else's. And you? Mercer thinks I have the evidence. I will make certain he continues believing it." Thomas protested, but the guards were already visible beyond the hill. Beatrice struck his horse's flank and sent him racing toward Fairhaven. She turned south, back toward Blackhaven Hall. The guards followed her. By the time Beatrice reached the estate, rain had begun sweeping in from the sea. Servants gathered beneath the entrance portico as she dismounted with her torn coat and mud-streaked skirts. Roland stood inside the doorway. His anger faded when he saw the blood on her sleeve. "What happened?" "Ask Lord Mercer." Roland dismissed the servants and pulled her into the library. "Mercer told me you attacked his surveyor and stole government records. Those records bear my seal. Then surrender them." Beatrice laughed once, without amusement. "You accused me of theft before the entire county, yet you accept Mercer's word without a single question. He has secured royal attendance for the regatta. He has invested more money in this harbor than your family ever did. He is preparing to purchase 3 villages after they are flooded." She placed the hidden tide gauge on Roland's desk. The engraved measurements caught the firelight. Roland stared at it, but his expression did not soften. "This proves nothing except that you removed estate property. It proves Pike falsified the tides by 6 feet, or that you altered this gauge to justify taking back control." The words struck more deeply than Beatrice expected. Roland had not merely chosen Mercer's ambition over her expertise. He had decided that his wife was capable of sacrificing villages to win an argument. Beatrice retrieved the gauge. "You still have time," she said. "Suspend the demolition and summon an independent crown surveyor. And surrender my authority to your family again? This is not about your authority. It has always been about that." Roland opened the library door and summoned the captain of his household guard. Duchess Beatrice is not to leave Blackhaven Hall, he ordered. Search her rooms and confiscate every harbor record in her possession. The captain hesitated. Your Grace, do it. Beatrice looked at the man she had once trusted with her life. She saw no confusion in his face, only wounded pride and the terror of appearing weak before Mercer. 2 guards escorted her upstairs. As they reached the gallery, a horn sounded from the harbor. Then another answered from the eastern cliffs. Roland hurried to the window. Far below, Lord Mercer's laborers had begun removing the central stones of the seawall, 4 days ahead of the schedule Roland had approved, and beyond them, the sea was already rising. Roland ordered the guards to release Beatrice and ran toward the harbor. She followed without waiting for permission. Rain swept across the cliff road in hard silver sheets. Below them, Lord Mercer's laborers had already removed nearly 30 feet of stone from the central section of the seawall. Water forced itself through the opening with every wave, spreading across the inner basin and pressing against the old drainage channels. The demolition had not merely begun ahead of schedule. It had begun at the most dangerous point in the tide. Roland reached the unfinished viewing platform and seized the foreman by the shoulder. Stop the work. The foreman held up a folded order protected beneath oilskin. Roland's ducal seal showed clearly at the bottom. Lord Mercer instructed us to open the central channel before nightfall. My order authorized preliminary work tomorrow morning. It did not authorize the removal of the barrier today. The foreman glanced toward the laborers. His lordship said the schedule had changed. On whose authority? Yours, Your Grace. Roland took the paper and read it. The first paragraph repeated the terms he had approved. Beneath it, another instruction had been added, directing the men to remove the central stones immediately. His seal was genuine. The handwriting was not. Beatrice stepped onto the platform and studied the water rather than the document. White foam curled past the exposed foundation. Floating markers that should have remained upright were already leaning toward the harbor. The offshore pressure has fallen faster than predicted, she said. The storm is driving water into the bay. The full spring tide will not peak until tomorrow night, but the surge has already raised the level by more than 2 feet. Roland looked toward Saltmere. How long before the lower streets flood? If the opening remains this size, several hours. And if the eastern section gives way? Beatrice watched a dark line appear between 2 foundation stones, less than 1. Roland turned back to the foreman. Replace every stone you removed. We cannot, the man replied. The lifting crane was taken to the eastern quay. Then bring it back. Lord Mercer has the key to the engine. The answer finally disturbed Roland more than it angered him. Mercer had advanced the demolition, altered an order bearing the ducal seal, and removed the machinery needed to reverse the work. Yet Roland still did not speak the words Beatrice was waiting to hear. He did not cancel the regatta. Instead, he turned to her. Your engineers must reinforce the opening until the race is over. Beatrice stared at him. Even now, with forged instructions in his hand and water pushing through the wall, he was searching for a way to preserve the celebration. My engineers warned you this section could not be opened safely. I am restoring their authority. No, you are asking them to accept responsibility for damage caused after you dismissed them. People may lose their homes. That is why the village pumps remain operating, Beatrice said. I withdrew the machinery building Mercer's pavilion, the surveying instruments he intended to misuse, and the credit financing your regatta. I did not abandon the people who trusted me. Roland's expression shifted. Until that moment, he had believed the silent pumps at the upper harbor meant Beatrice had disabled the entire drainage system. In fact, the 3 engines protecting Saltmere continued beating steadily beyond the dunes. She had withdrawn her support from him, not from the villages. "Then use those pumps to protect the harbor," he said. "They were built to drain rainwater and ordinary tidal seepage. They cannot defeat the sea after you remove the wall holding it back." Roland looked again at the altered order. He now possessed enough evidence to suspend the demolition, detain Mercer, and summon an independent crown surveyor. Beatrice watched him recognize each option. She also watched pride close his hand around the paper. "If I cancel the regatta," he said quietly, "Blackhaven loses the royal delegation, Mercer recalls his loan, and every newspaper in London reports that my wife overruled me in my own harbor." Beatrice felt the final remnant of hope leave her. "This is the moment you will remember," she said. "Not when Mercer deceived you. Not when the wall failed. This moment, when you understood the danger and decided your reputation mattered more." Hoofbeats sounded behind them. Lord Mercer's carriage descended the harbor road, its wheels throwing mud across the stones. Mercer stepped down beneath a servant's umbrella and regarded the damaged wall with controlled satisfaction. "Why have the laborers stopped?" Roland struck the altered order against his chest. "You changed my instructions." Mercer barely glanced at it. "I accelerated necessary work. The royal yachts require a wider channel. The storm surge is already entering the basin, according to your wife." "According to the water," Beatrice said. Mercer looked toward the flooded edge of the quay. "A temporary inconvenience. Once the central foundation is cleared, the tide will pass through the harbor, instead of pressing against it." "That is not how a protected basin works," Beatrice replied. "The seawall breaks the force of the incoming water. Remove it, and the surge travels directly into Saltmere." Mercer turned to Roland. "If you stop now, every expense becomes a loss. The king's representatives will arrive to find an unfinished channel and a duchess publicly dictating terms to her husband. Continue, and by tomorrow the opening will be complete." Roland said nothing. Mercer had offered him the same choice in a more flattering form. Beatrice waited. At last, Roland faced the foreman. "Suspend removal of the remaining stones. Reinforce what is still standing. But the regatta is not cancelled." It was a compromise designed to save his pride, not the coast. Mercer smiled faintly. "As you wish." A crack sounded beneath them. The entire platform shuddered. One of the exposed foundation blocks tilted forward and vanished into the water. The stones above it shifted in a slow, terrible chain. "Clear the wall," Beatrice shouted. Laborers dropped their tools and ran. Roland caught a boy who slipped on the wet boards and dragged him toward the quay. Beatrice seized the harbor bell rope and pulled until its iron warning rolled across Blackhaven. The eastern section collapsed. Water burst through the breach in a dark, solid mass. It smashed the unfinished platform, overturned 2 supply carts, and swept piles of dressed stone into the basin. Men clung to ropes, while fishermen dragged them clear. Beyond the dunes, the bells of Saltmere answered Beatrice's warning. She climbed onto the remains of the quay. "Open the old western canal," she ordered. "Move the children and elderly to St. Anne's Church. Take grain wagons to Lower Haven and send riders to every cottage below the flood markers." The fisherman obeyed immediately. Roland reached for her arm. "I am the Duke. Those orders must come from me." Beatrice looked at his hand until he released her. "They no longer care who owns the harbor," she said. "They are listening to the person trying to save them." A second bell began ringing from Saltmere. Then a rider appeared on the dune road, his horse laboring through water already spreading across the fields. "The eastern drainage gate is locked," he shouted. "Someone chained it from the seaward side." Beatrice looked toward Mercer. His carriage was gone, and across the flooded meadow, the first black wave struck the doors of Saltmere's schoolhouse. Beatrice ran toward Saltmere before Roland could answer. The flood had already crossed the eastern meadow and reached the first row of cottages. Water surged around garden walls, carrying broken fencing, fishing baskets, and lengths of timber toward the village square. "Thomas, take 6 men to the western canal," Beatrice ordered. "Break the old lock and raise the gate by hand if you must." Thomas hesitated. "The canal has not been opened in 12 years. The channel was cleared last autumn. It will hold." She turned to the approaching fishermen. "Move every wagon to the schoolhouse. Children and elderly residents go first. Take them uphill to St. Anne's Church. No furniture, no livestock unless they can be led beside the wagons. We do not lose time saving property while people remain below the flood line." The men separated without questioning her. Roland arrived moments later with his household guards. His coat was soaked, and the altered demolition order remained clenched in one hand. "Captain, send half your men to Lower Haven," Beatrice said. "The rest will help open the eastern drainage gate." The captain looked toward Roland. Roland's pride surfaced even with water spreading around his boots. "You will wait for my instructions." A church bell rang again. From the lower road came the cries of families abandoning their cottages. The captain waited. Beatrice stepped closer to Roland. "You may protect your rank after the village is empty. I will not be treated as a spectator on my own estate. Then stop behaving like one." Roland's face hardened, but the sound of cracking timber interrupted him. A cottage door tore from its hinges and struck the stone fountain in the village square. The 2 children stood trapped on the steps of the schoolhouse while the water climbed around them. The captain did not wait again. He sent his men forward. Roland watched his own guards obey Beatrice. For years he had assumed her authority came from his title. Now he saw the truth. The fishermen followed her because she knew which channel to open. The guards followed because her orders gave them something useful to do. The villagers trusted her because she had spent 12 years learning where the water would go. Beatrice waded to the schoolhouse and carried the younger child to a waiting wagon. Roland lifted the other and passed him to his mother. A frightened woman caught Beatrice's sleeve. "My husband is at the eastern gate. He went to open it before the water reached the cottages." Beatrice looked across the submerged fields. The gatehouse stood near the breached seawall, almost hidden by spray. "How long ago?" "Nearly half an hour." Beatrice turned to Thomas. "Keep working on the western canal. I am going to the gatehouse." Roland stepped into her path. "The current is too strong. If the eastern gate remains closed, all the water entering through the breach will be trapped behind Saltmere. Send someone else." "No one else knows the release mechanism." She took a coil of rope from a fishing cart and tied one end around her waist. 4 fishermen secured the other around the village fountain. Roland seized a second rope. Beatrice looked at him. "You do not know the safe markers. Then show me." They entered the water together. The current rose from their knees to their waists within 20 yards. Beatrice followed a line of stone posts, barely visible beneath the brown water. To either side lay drainage trenches deep enough to pull a man under. Halfway across the meadow, they found the missing villager clinging to a willow tree. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. "The gate is chained," he gasped as Roland dragged him toward the rope. Mercer's men drove iron wedges into the wheel. Beatrice sent the villager back along the guide rope with 2 fishermen. She and Roland continued toward the gatehouse. Inside, The floor was already submerged. A heavy chain had been wound through the spokes of the lifting wheel and secured with a new brass lock. 3 iron wedges held the mechanism in place. "This was prepared before the wall came down," Roland said. "Yes." Beatrice examined the lock. A small black anchor had been stamped beside the keyhole, the same mark Thomas had seen on crates unloaded at Mercer's private warehouse. She did not yet know what it signified, but Mercer had left proof that the closed gate was not an accident. Roland struck the lock with a length of iron. It did not break. "The chain is hardened," Beatrice said. "Remove the wedges first. The pressure behind the gate may turn the wheel once it is free." Together, they drove out the first wedge. The second had swollen tightly inside the wet timber. Roland braced both hands against the iron bar, while Beatrice struck its end with a mallet. Outside, the water rose against the gate. The third wedge came loose. The lifting wheel jerked so violently that the chain snapped tight and threw Roland against the wall. "The pressure is too great," he said. "No, it is enough." Beatrice opened the maintenance panel beneath the wheel. Inside ran a smaller counterweight chain, designed for emergencies if the main mechanism failed. She had added it 11 years earlier, after a winter flood nearly drowned 2 gatekeepers. Roland had complained at the time that the modification cost too much. Now it was their only way out. She released the safety catch. The counterweight dropped. The gate lifted several inches, then stopped as the outer chain pulled taut. Water screamed through the narrow opening, shaking the entire structure. "Again," Beatrice ordered. Roland helped her raise the counterweight by hand. They released it a second time. The lifting wheel tore through the chain. The gate flew upward, and a wall of trapped water rushed into the western channel. The force knocked Beatrice from her feet. Roland caught her wrist before the current dragged her through the machinery. For several seconds, he held her against the flooded floor until the first violence of the release passed. "You saved the village," he said. "We delayed its destruction." She pulled free and examined the black anchor lock. Roland's eyes followed hers. "Mercer ordered this. Mercer's men carried it out, but they entered your harbor under the authority you gave him." The words silenced him. By the time they returned to Saltmere, the water had begun falling around the schoolhouse steps. The western canal carried part of the surge away from the village, and the wagons had delivered most residents to higher ground. But Lower Haven remained exposed. A rider arrived from the southern road with worse news. Someone had removed the warning markers from the old drainage embankment. The villagers there had not known the seawall had failed until water entered their homes. Beatrice looked toward Blackhaven Hall. Its windows glowed above the dark hillside, where servants were still arranging the ballroom for guests who would never come. Then she saw water spilling over the lower carriage road. Mercer had not merely blocked Saltmere's gate. He had redirected the abandoned estate drains, turning Blackhaven's own tunnels into a second channel for the sea. The flood crossed the gardens and struck the terrace beneath Roland's ballroom. The first wave struck Blackhaven Hall before Beatrice reached the terrace. Seawater burst through the lower windows and swept across the ballroom floor. Servants fled as golden chairs overturned, flower arrangements collapsed, and royal banners dragged through the rising water. The orchestra platform broke loose and struck the marble steps. Roland stopped in the doorway. That morning, he had imagined the king's representatives entering beneath chandeliers and applauding the harbor he had transformed. Now, salt water covered the room where his triumph was meant to begin. "The servants are clear," the house steward reported, "but the water is still rising." Beatrice studied its direction. It was not entering only through the windows. A stronger current pushed upward through the floor vents beneath the orchestra platform. "The estate drain," she said. "Someone reversed the lower gate." Roland looked at her. "Can it be closed?" "Only from the tunnel beneath this room." They pulled aside the damaged platform and uncovered a maintenance hatch. Beatrice had designed the drainage route years earlier, but the new iron lock bore Mercer's black anchor mark. Roland broke it with a fireplace poker. A narrow stairway descended beneath the ballroom. Water already covered the lowest steps. Beatrice took a lantern and entered. "Stay here," Roland said. "This system was altered because you dismissed the only people who understood it. I am not waiting above while you guess." She descended without him. The tunnel below had once carried rainwater from Blackhaven's grounds toward the Western Canal. Mercer's workmen had built a new stone junction, redirecting the coastal surge beneath the hall. The construction was recent. Fresh mortar still showed between the stones. "This could not have been built in one day," Roland said behind her. "No. Mercer began preparing it while you were accusing me of inventing the danger." They reached the control gate. Its wheel had been removed, making it impossible to close from inside the tunnel. Beside it stood several wooden crates marked as Regatta supplies. Beatrice opened the nearest one. It contained blasting powder. Roland stared at the barrels stacked behind it. "Mercer told me these held signal charges for the race. Some may have. This is enough to destroy the remaining eastern foundation." She found coils of tarred fuse, iron drilling tools, and a map of the seawall. 3 sections had been circled in red. The central breach was only the first. Mercer intended to place charges beneath the rest of the wall before the spring tide peaked the following night. Once the entire barrier failed, Saltmere, Lower Haven, and St. Anne's Reach would be declared uninhabitable. Roland picked up the map. Why destroy Blackhaven Hall? He did not need to destroy it, Beatrice said. He needed the flood to reach it. She pointed to a line marking the altered tunnel. If your ballroom flooded during the storm, everyone would believe the damage came naturally through the breach. No one would examine the drains. The water would wash away the tools, the powder residue, and any records his men left behind. A muffled knock came from the far side of the tunnel wall. Beatrice raised the lantern. They followed the sound to a newly boarded opening. Roland tore away the planks and found Mr. Ellis, the elderly keeper of the estate drains, bound inside a storage recess. They carried him above the waterline and cut the ropes from his wrists. "Mercer's men took me yesterday," Ellis said. "I saw them reverse the junction gate. They said the Duke had ordered it." "I gave no such order," Roland replied. Ellis looked directly at him. "They carried written authority bearing your seal." Roland lowered his eyes. Again, Mercer had acted through powers Roland had willingly placed in his hands. "Did you see where they took the gate wheel?" Beatrice asked. "To the old pump chamber beneath the north garden." "But that is not what they were protecting." Ellis struggled to sit upright. "I heard them discussing 3 property surveys. They said the villages would belong to Mercer before the Crown inspectors arrived." Beatrice remembered the purchase agreements Thomas had carried toward Fairhaven. Mercer had not caused the flood merely to damage the villages. He had tied their destruction to a legal deadline. A shout came from the stairs. Thomas appeared with 2 fishermen carrying dispatch lamps. Behind them stood Sir Matthew, Beatrice's elder brother, accompanied by 4 officers from the County Revenue Service. He held a folded document in his hand. "I received the copies you sent from the signal tower," Matthew said. "Then I searched the county registry." Roland looked at the paper. "What did you find?" "A charge against Blackhaven's harbor revenues, filed yesterday by Lord Mercer. Matthew opened the document. The ordinary Regatta loan occupied the first pages. Deeper inside was a clause Roland had apparently signed without reading. If the harbor became insolvent, or the 3 coastal villages were declared unsafe, Mercer gained control of their leases and all future compensation paid for the land. The repayment deadline was 10 days. "The Regatta has lost its insurance," Matthew said. "Your merchants have diverted their cargo, and the harbor cannot collect enough revenue to meet the payment." Roland's face went still. "Then Mercer already has what he wanted." "Not yet," Beatrice said. "The villages must first be condemned as uninhabitable." A heavy impact shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the north garden, metal scraped against stone. Ellis seized Beatrice's sleeve. "The old pump chamber," he whispered. "That is where Mercer's men stored the detonators." Beatrice raised the map toward the lantern. A 4th red mark had been drawn beneath the temporary supports holding the damaged seawall together, and beside it someone had written a time: midnight. Beatrice left the flooded ballroom with Sir Matthew, Thomas, Roland, and the revenue officers. The old pump chamber stood beneath the north garden, reached through a narrow service passage. Its door had been forced open, and fresh boot prints crossed the wet floor. Inside, they found the missing gate wheel, coils of fuse, and 3 brass firing mechanisms laid upon a workbench. One had already been removed. 3 charges, Beatrice said, studying Mercer's map, one beneath each surviving section of the seawall. Roland reached for the nearest fuse. "Do not touch it," she warned. "If Mercer connected the lines before leaving, pulling one may ignite another." Beatrice sent Thomas to bring 2 of her engineers from Saltmere. Until they arrived, she traced the fuses through the inspection passages beneath the garden. The first ended inside a sealed powder barrel. The second ran toward the eastern quay. The third disappeared into a drainage conduit leading beneath the damaged wall. Sir Matthew examined the workbench. Beneath a false bottom, he found a leather ledger and several packets of correspondence. The ledger recorded payments to Mr. Pike, the demolition foreman, 2 harbor clerks, and the men who had chained the drainage gates. Every payment carried the black anchor symbol. The letters revealed the rest. Mercer had already negotiated to transfer the flooded coastline to a naval development company. Once the 3 villages were declared unsafe, he would acquire their leases through Roland's defaulted loan and resell them for more than 4 times their present value. Roland read the final letter twice. It instructed Pike to blame Beatrice's defective seawall for the disaster and use Roland's public accusation as proof that she had concealed its weakness. "He meant to ruin her before the flood," Sir Matthew said, "so no one would believe her afterward." Roland looked toward Beatrice. "I gave him the accusation he needed." "You gave it willingly," she replied. Her engineers arrived and separated the first 2 firing lines. The third proved more dangerous. It disappeared beneath water, filling the lower conduit, preventing them from reaching the charge safely. "We must cut it closer to the wall," Beatrice said. A revenue officer entered from the garden. "Mercer's carriage has been found abandoned near the western road. The driver says his lordship took a horse and rode toward the harbor. He is going to ignite the 3rd charge himself," Thomas said. Beatrice studied the map. If Mercer destroyed the eastern foundation, the next tide would pass directly into Lower Haven. The western canal could not carry that much water. Roland took a lantern. "Then we stop him." Sir Matthew blocked the doorway. "You remain here. Your signatures appear on the demolition order and the loan. Until the Crown determines your involvement, you are not free to go anywhere." I did not plan the flood. No, Beatrice said. You merely gave Mercer the harbor, dismissed everyone capable of opposing him, ignored the evidence, and preserved the Regatta after learning he had altered your order. Roland did not defend himself. Sir Matthew placed the ledger inside a metal dispatch case and assigned 2 officers to guard it. Beatrice then ordered the remaining men toward the seawall. Before leaving, she searched the abandoned workbench once more. Under a pile of drilling plans lay a small schedule written in Pike's hand. It listed the times Mercer's men had entered the signal tower, the drainage gate, and the pump chamber. Beside the midnight detonation was a second instruction. After the wall falls, burn the survey office. The survey office held Beatrice's original construction records, 12 years of tide observations, and the signed inspection reports proving the seawall had been sound before Roland ordered its destruction. Mercer intended to destroy the evidence and leave only his falsified figures behind. Beatrice handed the schedule to Matthew. Send officers to the survey office. Thomas comes with me. Roland stepped forward. Beatrice. She stopped him with a look. This is no longer your decision. Outside, the storm had weakened, but the sea continued striking the broken wall. Lanterns moved along the eastern quay as Mercer's remaining men carried something toward the breach. Then a red flame appeared at the end of the seawall. The final fuse had been lit. Beatrice ran toward the eastern seawall with Thomas and 4 engineers. The burning fuse stretched along the broken quay before disappearing beneath a stone inspection cover. Mercer's men fled when the revenue officers approached, leaving their tools behind. Do not follow them, Beatrice ordered. Find the charge. Her engineers lifted the cover. The fuse descended into a narrow conduit already filling with seawater. Beatrice studied Mercer's map. The powder had been placed beneath the temporary supports holding the surviving wall together. Cutting the visible line might not stop it. Mercer could have added a second fuse. We must flood the powder chamber, she said. The emergency sluice controlling that section stood farther along the wall. Its iron wheel had jammed under the pressure of the tide. Thomas and 2 fishermen pulled at it, but it would not move. Sir Matthew arrived with Roland under guard. He had brought every available man from Blackhaven Hall. Roland saw the burning fuse. How long? Minutes, Beatrice replied. If the sluice remains closed, Lower Haven will take the next tide without a barrier. Roland joined the men at the wheel. Together, they forced it through half a turn. Rust broke loose, but the mechanism stopped again. A support beam beneath the platform shifted, threatening to crush the sluice chain. Hold the wheel, Beatrice ordered. If it turns backward, the gate will close. Roland braced his injured shoulder against it, while the others moved the fallen beam. The iron spokes cut through his gloves, but he did not release them. Beatrice climbed into the inspection passage. Water reached her waist as she followed the fuse toward the powder chamber. She found the main charge inside a hollow beneath the wall, and a second fuse burning from the opposite direction. Mercer had expected someone to cut the first. Beatrice opened the chamber's lower valve. Nothing happened. Sand and fragments of mortar had blocked it. She drove an iron rod through the opening until seawater burst past her hands. The chamber began filling. Above her, the sluice wheel jerked violently. Roland cried out as one spoke struck his arm, but he kept the mechanism open until water poured through the passage and submerged the powder barrels. The first fuse reached the chamber. A dull flash flickered beneath the water, followed by smoke and silence. The wall remained standing. Beatrice climbed back onto the quay. Roland sat against the railing, while a fisherman bound his bleeding forearm. "You prevented the gate from closing," she said. "I helped repair one consequence of my own order." It was the first time he had not asked his actions to mean more than they did. Sir Matthew's officers searched the abandoned quay. They found 2 of Mercer's hired men, along with the missing detonator. Mercer himself was gone. Thomas noticed a lantern flashing from the eastern cliffs. 3 short signals, 2 long, 3 short again. "The signal tower," he said. "Someone is calling Mercer's private cutter into the cove." One captured laborer began to laugh. "You are too late. His lordship has the harbor master's daughter. He will leave with her before dawn, and the original purchase agreements will leave with him." Beatrice looked toward the distant tower. Clara Reed had helped copy the records in her survey office. If Mercer forced her aboard the cutter, he would gain both a hostage and the only witness who had seen his men remove the flood markers from Lower Haven. Beatrice took the black anchor lock from her coat and mounted the nearest horse. Sir Matthew called after her, "Wait for the officers. The cutter will not." She rode toward the cliffs as the signal flashed again. This time, it was not guiding a ship into Blackhaven. It was guiding Mercer out. Beatrice reached the eastern signal tower before Sir Matthew's officers. Mercer's horse stood beside the keeper's cottage. Below the cliff, his cutter waited beyond the reef with its sails raised, unable to enter the narrow cove without a signal from shore. Beatrice entered the tower. Clara sat bound beside the lantern mechanism. Mercer stood behind her with a pistol in one hand and the original purchase agreements in the other. "You should have remained in your ballroom," he said. "You flooded it. Your husband opened the harbor. I merely made his decision profitable." Mercer ordered Beatrice to light the black anchor signal, guiding the cutter through the reef. Once aboard, he intended to carry Clara and the documents to France before the Revenue Service could close the coast. Beatrice approached the lantern controls. "Release her first." Mercer pressed the pistol against Clara's shoulder. "When the ship enters the cove." Beatrice examined the lamps. Mercer had arranged them according to the private code found on his locks and ledger, but he did not know that the tower's mirrored screen could alter how the pattern appeared from the sea. She lit the first lamp. The cutter turned toward the cove. Then Beatrice pulled the emergency lever concealed beneath the control table. The mirrored screen rotated behind the lantern, changing Mercer's safe channel signal into the warning for submerged rocks. The cutter immediately turned away. Mercer saw the movement through the window. "What did you do?" "I warned them away from the reef." He dragged Clara to her feet. "Correct it." Beatrice lit a second lamp. This time, the signal called every harbor pilot and revenue boat to the eastern cove. Mercer raised the pistol toward her. Clara stamped hard upon his foot and threw herself aside. The shot struck the lantern frame, shattering the glass but missing Beatrice. Darkness filled the room. Beatrice pulled Clara behind the stone control housing as Mercer moved toward the staircase. He still carried the purchase agreements. If he reached the cliff path, he could destroy the papers before the officers arrived. Beatrice opened the lantern screen fully. Wind rushed through the broken frame and extinguished Mercer's remaining lamp. Without a signal, his cutter could neither enter the cove nor approach the landing safely. Outside, whistles answered from the water. Revenue boats were closing in. Mercer seized Beatrice's survey case from the floor and hurled it toward the broken window. She caught the leather strap before the case disappeared over the cliff. While his attention remained on her, Clara pulled the bell rope beside the stairs. The tower's iron alarm rang across the headland. Footsteps thundered below. Mercer reached the roof hatch, but Thomas entered from above. Sir Matthew's officers had climbed the outer maintenance ladder while Beatrice kept Mercer occupied. Mercer turned back and found the main staircase blocked by revenue officers. For the first time, he had nowhere left to go. He lowered the pistol slowly. "You have no proof that I ordered the flood," he said. "The demolition bears Roland's signature. The loan bears Roland's signature. Every gate was opened under Roland's authority." Beatrice took the purchase agreements from his hand. "And your payments bear the black anchor. Your locks carry it. Your correspondence names the company waiting to buy the condemned land. Mr. Ellis saw your men alter the drains, and Clara saw them remove the flood markers." Mercer looked at Roland's approaching lantern below the tower. "Then the Duke will fall with me." "He may," Beatrice said. "The difference is that he has stopped pretending he is innocent." Sir Matthew placed Mercer in irons. The cutter surrendered after finding the cove surrounded by revenue boats. Inside its cabin, officers discovered Mercer's traveling chest containing duplicate loan papers, deeds prepared for the 3 villages, and letters instructing his agents to sell the coastline after the flood. Clara was returned safely to her father. Before dawn, Beatrice stood outside the tower, while officers carried the evidence toward Blackhaven Hall. The storm had weakened, but the breached seawall remained vulnerable. The villages had survived the first surge. The spring tide would arrive the following night. Roland approached under guard, his injured arm bound tightly. "Mercer says every order leads back to me," he said. "Many of them do. I could claim he deceived me." "He did deceive you." Roland looked toward the flooded cottages. "But only after I chose to believe him." Sir Matthew handed Beatrice a sealed notice from the Crown Commissioner. News of the failed regatta, the flood, and the suspected land fraud had reached the royal delegation. The commissioner would arrive that afternoon to open a public inquiry. The hearing would take place inside Roland's ruined ballroom, and before the same villagers who had heard him call Beatrice a thief, the Duke would be required to explain why he knowingly ignored her warnings. The Crown Commissioner arrived that afternoon and convened the inquiry inside Blackhaven's ruined ballroom. Seawater stained the walls. Broken royal banners hung above villagers, fishermen, engineers, revenue officers, and newspaper reporters. Mercer entered in irons. Roland came last, wearing no ducal sash. Beatrice presented the evidence. Her original tide records proved Pike had falsified the measurements. The black anchor lock from Saltmere matched the symbol in Mercer's payment ledger. Mr. Ellis testified that Mercer's men had reversed the estate drains, while Clara confirmed that they removed Lower Haven's warning markers. Finally, Sir Matthew produced the papers recovered from Mercer's cutter, prepared deeds, duplicate loan documents, and letters promising to sell the coastline once the 3 villages were declared unsafe. Mercer pointed toward Roland. The Duke authorized the demolition. His seal opened every gatehouse. "He accused his wife before I touched the wall." The commissioner faced Roland. "Did Duchess Beatrice warn you?" "Yes." "Did she request an independent survey?" "Yes." "After learning Mercer altered your instructions, did you cancel the regatta?" Roland looked toward the families whose homes had flooded. "No." "Why?" Roland placed the demolition order on the evidence table. "Because I resented my wife's authority. Mercer told me she exaggerated the danger to control Blackhaven. I believed him because the lie excused what I wanted to do." Mercer's confidence faded. Roland turned toward the villagers. "Beatrice did not steal from the estate or falsify the tides. I accused her without evidence, dismissed her engineers, and confined her after she showed me proof against Mercer." "You were deceived," the commissioner said. "Yes, but only after I chose to distrust the person who had protected this coast for 12 years. Mercer exploited my vanity. He did not create it." Beatrice then placed her marriage settlement beside the demolition order. It proved that the pumps, rescue boats, surveying equipment, and part of the seawall belonged to her protected trust. Roland had possessed authority over his estate, but not the right to pledge her property or the village's coastal protections as security for Mercer's loan. The agreement Mercer intended to use to seize the villages was fraudulent. The commissioner closed the evidence ledger. This inquiry has established sufficient cause for criminal proceedings against Lord Mercer and a separate investigation into Duke Roland's conduct. It has also established that Duchess Beatrice's records were accurate and that her dismissal exposed Blackhaven to deliberate destruction. Outside, the harbor bell rang. Beatrice's engineers had completed the temporary barrier before the spring tide. The commissioner rose to deliver his temporary judgment. The Crown Commissioner ordered Mercer transferred to London for trial and suspended every claim against the 3 coastal villages. Blackhaven Harbor was placed under temporary administration. Roland lost all authority over the seawall, pumps, and coastal trust until Parliament completed its investigation. Beatrice's authority was restored immediately. Before the villagers and reporters, the commissioner declared that her tide records were accurate. Her accounts contained no evidence of theft, and the seawall had remained sound until Roland authorized its demolition. The accusation made publicly was corrected publicly. 3 months later, the final judgments arrived. Mercer was convicted of fraud, conspiracy to cause destructive flooding, kidnapping, attempted murder, and destruction of evidence. His property was seized to compensate families whose homes had been damaged. Pike and the demolition foreman received reduced sentences for surrendering their records and testifying against him. The clerks who forged Roland's instructions were removed and prosecuted separately. Parliament did not remove Roland's title, but it suspended his seat and permanently barred him from controlling Blackhaven Harbor. Because the demolition order carried his lawful signature, he remained responsible for the cost of rebuilding the seawall and compensating the villages. Roland sold his London residence, racing horses, and 2 inland properties. Blackhaven Hall was placed under trusteeship until the final family had been rehoused. He did not appeal. Beatrice accepted leadership of the new coastal trust under conditions written by her. The seawall, pumps, rescue boats, and survey office would belong to the trust rather than the ducal estate. Fishermen and village representatives would hold elected seats on its board. No future duke could alter the defenses or dismiss the chief engineer without an independent inspection and public hearing. By winter, Saltmere's school had reopened above a newly marked floodline. Clara joined the survey office, Thomas resumed training harbor pilots, and every tide measurement was copied into 3 separate ledgers. Roland came to Blackhaven Cottage on the morning the separation agreement arrived. His injured arm had healed, though 2 fingers remained stiff from holding the sluice wheel. He carried no flowers and offered no promises. Beatrice read every page. Roland had transferred his final vote in the coastal trust to the villages and surrendered all claims over the property protected by her marriage settlement. The agreement contained no condition requiring her return. "I once believed helping at the wall might balance what I had done," he said. It did not. No. He looked toward the rebuilt harbor. "I cannot undo the accusation, but you can continue correcting it whenever someone repeats it. I will." Roland did not ask whether she still loved him. He signed the agreement and left alone. That afternoon, Beatrice stood before the restored seawall with the engineers, fishermen, and families who had rebuilt it. Their names had been cast into the new central gate. Hers appeared among them, not above them. Thomas offered her the silver hammer Roland had used when the wall's destruction began. Beatrice set it aside and chose an ordinary stoneworker's hammer. Before the assembled villages, she drove the first locking pin into the gate. The tide struck the seawall with enough force to shake the platform. The stone held. Water broke into white foam and fell harmlessly back into the sea, while Beatrice turned toward a harbor that would never belong to one man again.